We know we looked a bit stupid. It was a little bit embarrassing. If we'd released FM25 in the state that it was in, it wouldn't have been good value for money, and it would have damaged us forever.
Football Manager has finally ended its radio silence around why the game was canceled. It comes from an interview by the head of the studio, Sports Interactive, which makes Football Manager, Miles Jacobson. He sat down and did the interview. The Athletic and BBC wrote articles on it. The Athletic article is better, so that's the one that we're going to be reading off of. And he provided not only reasons why the game was canceled, but kind of their thought process and how all of it happened. And some of it, to be perfectly honest, is kind of insane, particularly the stuff around the coding that is actually being made fun of in coding Reddits, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Now, the BBC article delivers you a few of the things that you probably could have assumed. It starts by saying that it was embarrassing. Yeah, probably. Not probably. He's quoted as saying, "I wasn't happy with the quality of the game, and I wasn't prepared for people to be going out and spending their hard-earned money on something that wasn't good enough." Which look, I'll be honest, I appreciate that sentiment. I do. Because there are definitely plenty of companies, this is undeniable if you play video games, there are definitely plenty of companies that will push games out when they're not ready. And so it is the right decision, if you acknowledge that the game is not ready, to not release it. But this is what I said at the time. The reason I like the Athletic article more, though, is because it goes into detail and some pretty interesting, weird details around the moment that Miles knew they weren't going to release the game. Because it's probably a lot earlier than you realize. It's a lot earlier than I realized that they knew. It'd be unfair not to mention that he starts the interview by saying, "I feel the need to apologize to our community for not delivering last year." And it's a long, polite apology that he drops. But this is the section that I'm super interested in. For Jacobson, the decision to cancel FM25 came just before Christmas. He received a build of the game and was going to spend a few days playing it before coming back from his break with notes. He quickly came to the realization that features were missing from the build. He cites the inability to find his youth squad before adding, "I literally sat there and just couldn't find things in my own game. It was pretty embarrassing. It was within an hour that I sat there and thought, we can't release." This would be December 2024. Remember, we didn't find out that Football Manager was canceled until February. But as the article acknowledges, the game had already been delayed twice, at the point that Miles had brought the game home and was playing it. But I just want to hone in on this moment for a second. It's the beginning of the decision, at least the significant beginning of the decision to cancel the game, came from Miles himself just playing the game at home. Which it just feels weird to me in my brain, obviously, that this whole, game that nearly 20 million people play is delayed for a whole year because of, one person kind of playing it at home for a few days and going, doesn't really work right now. Which I get. I mean, if there is one person that's going to make that decision, it's like the studio director of the studio that makes the game. And obviously, I'm sure conversations had to happen after that, but it was basically just him sitting there playing the game. That's the kernel of the entire cancellation. But it took until February for that to actually be possible. And this interview lays out how they got there, which is why we're here. It starts with the development update on September 4th, 2024, right? This is before the game was delayed necessarily, not in a serious way. All we knew was that it was transitioning to Unity and it was going to be this great thing. A development update for FM25 was published on September 4th, 2024, which had a dedicated revising our timelines subsection as a result of 3 curveballs coming Sports Interactive's way just hours before. The first of these was a result of collective human error, as multiple people forgot about a bug-fixing process that is necessary to publish the game. Basically, one of the key reasons that the game was delayed initially, and one of the key reasons that the game ended up being doomed, was because people in the studio forgot about a bug-fixing process. I mean, look, sometimes you mess up. Sometimes you do mess up. Not that I'm making excuses for the studio, because this is obviously a massive mistake in a corporation that should have enough fail-safes to stop this, but there really is no other way to frame this than they literally just messed up. And Miles says that. He says that's completely on us before going into the other 2 things that existed. But I mean, I've uploaded a YouTube video without audio before, right? You do make mistakes, but the fact that they made a mistake when there was so much anticipation and attention, if you made this mistake going into FM23 and it caused a 2-week delay or something, that would be one thing. It just feels like there's so much emphasis on this game that to have somehow had a bug fixing process slip all the way through the cracks, that is a pretty brutal indictment of the work processes, which I would imagine they've at least attempted to fix since then. But that is rough. Now, Miles on the second one said that the second curveball was a legal issue. With all legal issues, you can never really say what happened. It was an email that came into Sega's legal team that day that was definitely going to cause a delay in release. So basically, the day they dropped the announcement on September 4th, they got an email about a legal issue right after discovering that they had forgotten about a bug fixing process. So at no point, really, in the hype up for FM25, did they believe they were going to be able to deliver a game on time. That's what I'm getting from this, which, damn. He could not go into the issue of the third unexpected development, but postponement talks started that day. It is pretty easy to see how the game ended up being canceled, considering how doomed it seems it was from the start. Now, those are the reasons for the delays, but there are other actual reasons for the cancellation, outside of the fact that Miles couldn't find his youth team when he was playing at home in December. And the big one was a coder's nightmare that, I'm not even joking, has literally turned into a meme on coding subreddits. But here's the basics first. Working with Unity natively, you're actually programming in a language called C#, whereas historically we've always programmed in C++. We were then expecting it to take about 2 weeks to do all the work of converting the C++ code into C#. Some of it took 2 weeks, some of it took 9 months. So basically, in their timeline of when they were going to get things done, they expected to be done converting the old code into the new code to work with Unity in 2 weeks. And some of it ended up taking 9 months. Whilst we've got some of the underlying code that drives the game, the whole user interface had to be written from scratch. These graphics all had to be redone. The database was restructured in certain areas as well. A lot of the code that was in C++ still needed work done to be able to be translated to C#. So there was definitely a lot more work than we were expecting, even though we'd done the pre-production stage. Here's the thing though, you could have expected all of this, because that was the whole point of what they were doing in the first place, which was changing the whole UI, right? This is what they said that they were doing, changing the whole UI. The graphics had to be redone. Translating the database into Unity is something that you could see coming from the time that you decided you were going to switch to Unity, which according to their statements was obviously years before they started the actual production of the game. So basically, once they opened the box, they found out there was a lot more work in there than they thought. So somebody just dropped the ball in terms of trying to figure out, like a key cause of the cancellation is that person or group of people or whoever dropped the ball when they were trying to project how long this was going to take. But now we're going to take a field trip to programmer humor for the people that understand this stuff. This is the post. Said actual estimate by professional games studio. I'm the dumbest man alive. We can convert a 20-year-old code base from C++ to C# in 2 weeks. And then they give them a "you're clearly dumber." One of the top comments saying, within 2 weeks, I'm not sure I could turn a code base from 20-year-old C++ into C++. Obviously, Miles' background in particular is not necessarily in the coding side. He initially joined the studio as a tester, if memory serves correctly, but this was a massive, massive oversight. The Football Manager subreddit tackled it in a bit of a different way with a bored reaction. Historically, we've always programmed in C++. We were then expecting it would take 2 weeks to do all the work of converting the C++ into C#. The board are extremely disappointed that some of it took 2 weeks. Some of it took 9 months. Whatever the actual cause for the estimate, it's clear that that estimate, based off the publicly available information, was grossly off and massively contributed to the fact that the game was just never going to be ready to be released for an FM25. And that meant, of course, we had to head towards FM26. But the way that this was rolled out and revealed was also interesting to me because it had a lot to do with like bureaucracy and stuff. And we'd guessed at this, but this is confirmation now. The cancellation of FM25 was revealed when Sega Sammy, the holding company that owns Japanese video game company Sega, released its Q3 financial results presentation for the year ending March 2025. Immediately following the news, included as part of the Q3 results, the stock dropped by 4%. Financially, it was a disaster. Yeah, but it turns out before that announcement was even made, the team was already working under the assumption that they wouldn't be releasing FM25. They just weren't allowed to ask about it. It started with a phone call to a guy named Jürgen Post, who is the chief operating officer of Sega's Europe West Studios, apparently. Miles said he was more understanding than some of the finance people, but they're doing their job, so I fully understand that. He basically called him up and said, hey, we're going to delay the game. Or, sorry, we're going to cancel the game. This is the section I'm talking about, though. Work on FM26 started in secret. Well, the decision to cancel FM25 had been communicated to Sega in early January, so like a whole more than a month before we found out. It was not allowed to be shared internally until the end of the month because of stock market rules. Initially, some of the design team began working on what they would do if they had more time, but we're not allowed to ask why. I would imagine they kind of knew what was going on at that point. But it basically means since early January, the team has been working under the assumption that the game was canceled and figuring out what they could do with more of that time. The optimist in me wants to believe that that is going to contribute to a better game now because they have been able to focus on making a game to come out at the normal time for FM26 for longer. Obviously, the jury is still out. Once the announcement was made, the team split into different hit squads, looking at the user interface, user experience, and everything else, which excellent corporate terminology going on there. But the fallout from this was pretty serious, and apparently Miles was actually feeling the heat, which now I remember thinking at the time that Miles might be in trouble. Obviously, if you're the head of a game studio that's supposed to release a yearly game and a yearly game doesn't come out, that's difficult. But this is what he had to say about that situation. In the circumstances, Sega have been massively supportive. I don't think I'll be allowed to forget what happened, and I shouldn't be either, but they understand that quality is important when it comes to releasing games. You can't just put in a box and expect to sell it. A lot of companies do, honestly. He says if they hadn't bounced back this year, he admits, I would have been first out the door. But the article also points out that nobody was fired as a result of the game not releasing for a year, which means this was some Daniel Levy level, like, club management going on at SI, that their books were balanced enough, they were supported enough by Sega that they didn't need to let anybody go, even though they didn't release a game for a whole year. It's honestly kind of impressive. I mean, I figured somebody was getting fired somewhere. And you're never hoping for somebody to lose their job, but obviously some catastrophically bad things had to go wrong, so I'm also surprised somebody didn't get let go because they overly contributed to one of those catastrophic things. He also addressed the way they've approached things on social media, and it's the way they've approached things on social media that makes this interview so fascinating, because they have basically talked about absolutely nothing publicly ever since they canceled the game, with the one exception of doing their posts about how the game would stay up because they've extended the licenses and stuff, which was just the most annoying post of all time. And I'm not gonna lie, I do kind of back Miles' reasons for the way they've handled social media, although I think they could have done it a little cleaner. We've made a lot of mistakes, and we own them all, and I apologize for them all, but you can't change the past. That's like the header explanation for the way they've approached things on social media. Now, I don't know if there's a full transcript for the interview somewhere. I can't find it, right? But maybe he talks about those mistakes in detail. He's obviously talked about some of them already. That's another reason why we went quiet after we announced that the game was canceled. We wanted to go back when we've actually got something to talk about. Like, I back that. They probably should have put out a post that says, we're going dark, we're getting to work, we'll be back when we have something to show you. That would have been nice. It would have been nice to put a post out like that before going dark. Didn't want to promise that we're going to deliver a game this year until we know that we're going to be able to deliver. In this world, you've got to shut the up. Otherwise, people will take a tiny breadcrumb and turn it into a loaf of bread. Yeah, like, I get that, but you do probably want to, like, if you're talking about, which he's obviously apologetic and talks about how we know the impact that this game has on people's lives and we let people down. You double down on letting people down if you don't at least let people know something's going on. You really just needed one post, one blog post, one anything, one interview like this, anything, to say, we're nose to the grindstone, we're back to work, we're hoping that we can fix all of these issues, and we'll give you more information as soon as we can get it. You don't want to promise you're going to deliver a game next year, so don't. But say something, right? So I'm sorry we had to wait a while, but this is the right time to be talking about it. Clearly, this interview, maybe more than anything, besides providing us a window into all of these interesting and mildly horrifying reasons that the game got canceled, is a sign that they are now confident in the game again, or at least confident in the fact that they're going to be able to release the game on time. Because if you're saying that you don't want to talk until you have something, well, now you're talking. That means you have something, right? We've gotten the Match Engine first look, which I reacted to on the Zealand Live YouTube channel. We've gotten the initial trailer or whatever, like the first post that they're coming back, right? So just the fact that he's saying this and then the act of him doing this interview, I think we're headed back towards business as usual. Obviously, this game's going to be very different than any Football Manager any of us have ever played before, but at least in terms of the schedule, there seems to be a confidence there now. And that's kind of how he ends the interview. I describe it as we've been in a very, very long tunnel and we couldn't see the light at the end of it. When the new messaging system went in, he's talking about a piece of the UI, which very interestingly, I'll show you. This is a great article. I'm going to link it in the BBC one down in the description if you want to read the entire thing. I'm just picking out the highlights I wanted to talk to you about. But this is what I was looking for. It's not what FM25 was going to be. FM26, that is, because that was a mistake. There is a lot of FM25 in there. There's also some more FM24 things in there than there were going to be. And there are some things that we already had down for FM26 that are now in there. So basically saying that they tried to change too much and they've gone back a little bit. And the reason being it was too different. Almost. That FM25 was too different, and so they have brought some of their favorite pieces in from FM24. That is, of course, dangerous. That kind of scares me a little bit. The idea that FM26 is supposed to be a huge leap forward, and now we're including more things from FM24. How big of a huge leap is it, necessarily? I mean, we all saw the match engine first look, or the match experience first look. Yeah, the graphics are way better, but the match engine still looks familiar, like the way the players are moving and stuff. But it's so early, it's impossible to accurately judge how much of FM24 has made it into FM26. But as evidenced by this quote, like when the new messaging system went in, we went round the bend and we could see the light at the end of the tunnel, that this was something that was a bit more of a nod back to FM24. Clearly, they like it a lot. And now they see the light at the end of the tunnel, right? The finish line for the game is in front of them, finally. I don't think any of us realized what a big part of it was, but that was the thing that made me be able to see the light. And it's not just me, it's a lot of people. The mood change when that went in was huge, just huge. It was like, wow, we really do have a game again. They have a game again. Cool. All those reasons now understood. Hopefully the game is great. But right now, obviously, we have no idea. All we know for sure, at least according to Miles, is what happened and what caused the cancellation and when they knew, which is kind of wild to get the curtain pulled back in the first place. I know this isn't a normal type of video on this channel, but I figured an interview from the head of the studio after nearly 2 years of radio silence was worth kind of reading and reacting to it with you guys here. But any and all Football Manager stuff that comes out, there will be videos of that on the Zealand Live YouTube channel, which has been kind of remodeled in the last 6 months to a year to be more YouTube-ish and not just reposting my streams. So there will be full breakdowns and reactions of all Football Manager news over there. But this one was so important, I wanted to put it here, and I'm excited to read your thoughts in the comments. I'll see y'all on stream. You have a game. Yes. I'll take that.